You're standing in a stone cell, 12 feet wide, watching two men watch you. They don't blink. They don't look away. Not when you eat. Not when you cry. Not when you bleed through your clothes and have to ask for rags. They just sit there, recording everything, because the people who put you here discovered something more effective than torture. They discovered that a mother's love is the sharpest blade of all, and they're about to use your own child to cut you apart from the inside. Before we go any deeper, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from. It genuinely amazes me that a story this dark, from over 2 centuries ago, still reaches across every border and every generation. This is July 1793, Paris, and the woman in that cell is prisoner number 280. You might know her by another name, Marie Antoinette, former Queen of France. But that title means nothing now. The crown is gone. Her husband is dead. Her country wants her blood. And for the next 76 days, the revolutionary government is going to conduct an experiment in psychological destruction so methodical, so calculated, that when the guillotine finally falls, it will feel like mercy. Because what they did before the blade dropped was something history tried very hard to forget. Let me take you back to who she actually was, because the woman they tortured bears almost no resemblance to the caricature they created. Maria Antonia Josepha Johanna, born in Vienna, 1755. 14th child of Empress Maria Theresa of Austria. At 14 years old, she was handed over to France like a diplomatic gift, married to the awkward teenage boy who would become Louis XVI. This wasn't romance. This was a peace treaty written in human flesh. The French court loathed her instantly. She was Austrian, which meant enemy blood. She was young, uncertain, didn't understand the brutal politics of Versailles. The courtiers mocked her accent, her fashion, her every misstep. Even her own husband avoided her. Their marriage wasn't consummated for 7 years, a humiliation whispered across Europe, fodder for pornographic pamphlets that painted her as everything from barren to deviant. So she retreated into extravagance. Elaborate hairstyles 3 feet high. Gowns that cost more than a peasant earned in a lifetime. Her private estate, the Petit Trianon, where she played at being a shepherdess while real shepherds starved. The French people, crushed under taxes and famine, gave her a nickname, Madame Deficit. Did she really say, "Let them eat cake"? No. That line was propaganda, recycled from decades earlier. But truth didn't matter. The narrative had already been written. By 1789, when revolution erupted, Marie Antoinette was France's perfect scapegoat. Foreign, female, royal. A trifecta that made her easier to hate than the centuries of systemic corruption that actually bankrupted the nation. But here's what the revolutionary propaganda didn't show. By 1793, she wasn't the frivolous girl in diamonds anymore. She was a mother of 4 who'd watched her eldest son die of tuberculosis at 7. She'd seen her husband dragged to the scaffold and beheaded. She'd spent months locked in the Temple prison, trying to shield her surviving children from the howling mobs outside. She'd already lost everything. The revolutionaries were about to teach her she could lose more. The Temple prison was a medieval fortress, dark and damp, originally built by the Knights Templar. After Louis XVI's execution in January 1793, Marie Antoinette and her 2 remaining children, 14-year-old Marie Thérèse and 8-year-old Louis Charles, were confined to a tower. At first, they were kept together. She tried to maintain normalcy. Lessons, prayers, holding them close when the sounds of the guillotine echoed from the Place de la Révolution. But the guards were always watching, taking notes. Reporting back to the Committee of Public Safety, the revolutionary government now running France with an iron fist. And they noticed something critical. Marie Antoinette could endure insults, deprivation, even threats to her own life. But threaten her children, and she shattered. So they started experimenting. First, restricted access. She had to beg permission to see her own son and daughter. Then they installed additional guards inside the family quarters. Men who sat in corners, staring, recording every word, every embrace, every moment of vulnerability. The children were forbidden from speaking German, their mother's native tongue. Even their private language was now state property. Marie Antoinette began to unravel. Her hair, light brown when she entered the temple, started turning white, not gradually, rapidly. A documented phenomenon now called Marie Antoinette syndrome, where extreme psychological stress causes sudden depigmentation. She stopped eating. She developed hemorrhaging, likely uterine cancer, that she tried desperately to hide from the men watching her bleed. But she held on because she still had her children. The revolutionaries knew they needed to take that away. July 3, 1793, 10 o'clock at night. Marie Antoinette has just put 8-year-old Louis Charles to bed. He's sleeping beside her. She hasn't let him out of her sight since they killed his father. Her daughter and sister-in-law are in adjacent rooms. Then she hears it. Boots, heavy. Multiple coming up the tower stairs. The door explodes inward. 6 municipal guards, led by a man holding an official decree from the Committee of Public Safety. They've come for the boy. He's to be re-educated by the Republic, separated from his mother's corrupting influence. Marie Therese would later write about what happened next. Her mother, usually so composed, went feral. She threw herself between the guards and her sleeping son, grabbed Louis Charles and held him so tightly he woke up screaming, confused. And then she started fighting, not with words, with her body, blocking the doorway, screaming until her voice cracked. "You will not take him. You will have to kill me first." For 1 full hour, she refused to move. The guards threatened her, threatened the children, said they would use force. She didn't care. She had become something primal. A mother protecting her child with everything she had left. Finally, her sister-in-law begged her to stop. The boy was hysterical. The guards were getting violent. Marie Antoinette's resistance broke. She kissed Louis Charles one last time, whispered something in his ear that history will never know. And then she watched as 6 grown men dragged her 8-year-old son down the stairs, his screams echoing until they faded into silence. She collapsed on the floor and didn't move for hours. But here's where the cruelty becomes systematic. The revolutionaries didn't just take her son. They gave him to Antoine Simon, a radical cobbler specifically chosen to destroy the child. Simon locked Louis Charles in a dark, windowless room, forced him to wear a red revolutionary cap, made him sing songs cursing the monarchy. And when the boy refused, Simon beat him, starved him, kept him in isolation until his spirit broke. Within weeks, Louis Charles was repeating everything they told him, including accusations against his mother so vile, so monstrous, they would become a weapon in the final act of her destruction. Marie Antoinette didn't know the details, but she knew her son was suffering, and there was nothing she could do. August 1st, 1793, 2 in the morning, guards burst into her room. No explanation, just an order. "You're being transferred." They separated her from her daughter and sister-in-law. She begged to say goodbye. They refused. They dragged her down the stairs, threw her in a carriage, and drove through the dark Paris streets to a place called the Conciergerie. If you know anything about the French Revolution, you know that name. The Conciergerie was the antechamber to the guillotine. It's where prisoners spent their final days before execution. Marie Antoinette wasn't being relocated. She was being prepared for death. But the revolutionaries wanted to make those final days as psychologically devastating as possible. She was given prisoner number 280, not her name. Not even the widow Capet, their preferred insult. Just a number. Her cell was 12 feet by 8, damp stone walls covered in mold. A thin straw mattress, a wooden table, 2 chairs, a chamber pot, 1 candle, no windows. Just suffocating medieval darkness. And here's the truly insidious detail. They gave her a privacy screen. A folding screen so she could change clothes or use the chamber pot in private. Sounds humane, right? Wrong. Because inside that cell, at all times, sat 2 armed guards. They watched her every single moment, when she ate, when she slept, when she changed behind that useless screen, when she used the chamber pot, when she prayed, when she cried. Constant, unblinking surveillance. This wasn't about security. She was a middle-aged woman in failing health, locked in a dungeon. This was psychological torture designed to strip away her last shred of dignity. Historical accounts describe how she tried to maintain composure. She would sit for hours, staring at the wall, her face completely blank. The guards reported that she barely spoke, barely moved, barely ate. But at night, when she thought they couldn't see in the candlelight, they heard her whispering, "Louis Charles, Louis Charles," over and over. She developed severe hemorrhaging, bled through her clothes, had to ask the guards for rags. A humiliation endured in front of men who stared without mercy. Her hair, now completely white, started falling out in clumps. She was 37 years old. She looked 60, and then came the trial. October 14th, 1793, 8 in the morning. Marie Antoinette was dragged from her cell to the Revolutionary Tribunal. This wasn't a trial. It was theater. The verdict was already decided. But the revolutionaries needed a show, something to justify her execution to history. The courtroom was packed. Revolutionary officials, journalists, citizens eager to see the former queen humiliated. The prosecutor, Antoine Fouquier-Tinville, prepared charges of treason, conspiracy, financial corruption. Marie Antoinette sat in the defendant's chair, pale, gaunt, dressed in widow's black. For 2 days, they threw accusations at her. She responded with startling composure and intelligence, refuted false claims, admitted mistakes without groveling, refused to be broken. So Fouquier-Tinville played his final, most venomous card. He called a witness, Jacques Hebert, a radical journalist, and Hebert repeated accusations allegedly made by Marie Antoinette's own 8-year-old son. Louis Charles, under coaching from his captors, had claimed his mother committed incest with him. Let that sink in. They accused her of sexually abusing her own child, using testimony tortured out of an 8-year-old boy. In a public courtroom, in front of hundreds of people. The room went silent. Even the bloodthirsty mob seemed stunned. Marie Antoinette had remained stoic through every insult, every lie, every threat. But this shattered her. She stood, her voice cracking with raw emotion. "I appeal to all the mothers present in this room. Is there among you a single one who would not shudder at such an accusation?" She wasn't addressing the judges. She spoke directly to the women in the crowd. Mothers, daughters, sisters. For the first time in the trial, she wasn't defending herself as a queen. She was speaking as a mother whose child had been weaponized against her. Nature itself refuses to respond to such a charge made against a mother. The courtroom erupted. Some women who'd come to jeer were moved to tears. Even some revolutionary officials shifted uncomfortably. It was too much. Too cruel. Fouquier-Tinville didn't care. He steamrolled through the rest. At 4 in the morning on October 16th, after less than 2 days, Marie Antoinette was found guilty. Sentence: death by guillotine. Execution scheduled for later that same day. Back in her cell, with dawn approaching and death hours away, she was finally given pen, paper, and ink. She didn't write a manifesto, didn't curse the revolution, didn't beg. She wrote a letter to her sister. "It is to you, sister, that I write for the last time. I have just been condemned, not to a shameful death that is only for criminals, but to rejoin your brother. Innocent like him, I hope to show the same firmness in my last moments. I am calm, as one is when one's conscience reproaches one with nothing." She wrote about her children, asked forgiveness for any wrongs, begged her sister-in-law to care for them. May my son never forget his father's last words, which I expressly repeat to him. Let him never seek to avenge our death. 4 pages. Every ounce of remaining love poured onto paper. She signed it simply, Marie Antoinette. Then she handed it to a guard. The letter was never delivered. Her jailers intercepted it. It vanished into a revolutionary archive. Her sister-in-law never read it. Neither did her daughter. The letter wasn't discovered until decades later, long after everyone Marie Antoinette loved was dead. Her final words to her family died in silence. October 16, 1793. 11 in the morning. The executioner's assistant entered her cell. Every step that followed was designed to strip away her final identity. First, the dress. She had to remove her black morning gown and put on a plain white chemise, the uniform of the condemned. She asked to change in private. The guard refused. She undressed in front of the men who'd been watching her for months. Second, the hair. Her white, brittle hair was crudely hacked off with shears. Rough hands, sharp blades, no ceremony. Third, the binding. Her hands were tied behind her back with coarse rope, so tight it cut into her wrists. She flinched. "You did not bind my husband's hands like this?" The guard ignored her. At 11, she was led into blinding daylight. She'd been in that dark cell for 76 days. The sun hurt her eyes. She expected a closed carriage, the small mercy her husband had been granted. Instead, there was a rough, open wooden cart, a tumbrel, the kind used to transport animal carcasses. She climbed in, hands bound, exposed to the entirety of Paris. As the cart lurched forward, thousands lined the streets, screaming, jeering, spitting, throwing garbage. One man sat at a window, sketching furiously. Jacques-Louis David, the revolutionary artist who'd voted for her death. His drawing survives. It shows a thin, hollow-eyed woman sitting rigidly upright, her face a mask of grim dignity as the world howled for her blood. The journey took over an hour. An hour of public humiliation designed to destroy whatever remained of her spirit. It didn't work. At 12:15, the cart stopped at the Place de la Révolution. The crowd roared. Marie Antoinette climbed the scaffold steps without assistance, her legs shaking, her head held high. And then, in the final moment of her life, something extraordinary happened. As she walked toward the plank, she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot. She stopped, turned to him. I spoke her last words. "Pardon me, sir. I did not mean to do it." An apology to the man about to kill her. A bizarre, surreal act of courtesy. The final reflex of a life lived under impossible protocol. But it was more than that. It was a choice. In the face of absolute degradation, she chose grace. 20 seconds later, the blade fell. The French Revolution wanted to destroy Marie Antoinette, the symbol, the Austrian woman, the wasteful queen, the embodiment of royal excess. They subjected her to calculated psychological torture, weaponized her own child against her, stripped her of every dignity, every comfort, every shred of privacy. And in the end, they failed. Because in their obsession with breaking the queen, they accidentally revealed the human being underneath, a mother who fought like hell for her children, a woman who faced monstrous accusations with courage, a person who, even on the steps of the guillotine, held on to her humanity. They wanted her remembered as the widow Capet, a traitor who deserved everything she got. Instead, history remembers Marie Antoinette, a woman who endured 76 days of calculated cruelty and still found the grace to apologize to her executioner. That's the part they couldn't take from her. The part that survives centuries later when all the revolution's justifications have turned to dust. Not the queen in diamonds, not the caricature in propaganda, but the mother whispering her son's name in the dark. The woman who stood in a courtroom and appealed to every mother present. The prisoner who chose, in her final breath, to say, "Pardon me," instead of "damn you." They tried to erase her humanity. And in doing so, they preserved it forever.